As of right now, my most popular video is my video talking about some ban strategies in competitive Pokemon, specifically in regards to Smogon singles, and I'm glad. It's one of my personal favourite videos I've done, and for the most part, you all really enjoyed it too, which, you love to see it. However, something that a couple people said in regards to these bans is that they didn't like how they limited creativity, and I kinda gotta disagree there. At the end of the day, this is fucking Pokemon, right? It's kinda limitless with what you can do. For every ban strategy, there's like fucking tens of thousands of strategies that you could use that with no issue at all. Sure, not all of them are good, a lot of them might border on gimmicky, but they exist. There's no getting around that. Also, I'm just keeping it real, right? I know for a fact half you don't give a fuck about creativity. If all this shit was unbanned, you just go slap double team on your favorite Pokemon and go cheese some people. And like, I get it, right? I love cheese. That's fine. But I'm just saying it how it is. So yeah, when it comes to strategies and team building, even with these bans in place, the sky's the limit, really. And that's why today, I want to talk about some of my favorite creative and innovative strategies that I've seen over my time playing Pokemon. And for the record, these will vary massively in viability and practicality. A lot of them are bordering on gimmicks, but I don't care, because I just think they're neat, and that is what matters most. As usual, we're going to start with Generation 1, the one I'm the most familiar with and the one that I personally enjoy the most. And this is a really outlandish strategy. In fact, it's so outlandish that I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere online. The only place I've heard about this strategy was on a Discord server that is now deleted, so I can't even check who came up with this in the first place. No matter how out there and honestly pretty gimmicky this strat is, I think it's really fucking cool. We're gonna talk about level 85 Chansey. When it comes to competitive Pokemon, especially if you're playing on Pokemon Showdown, you never really think about your Pokemon's level. I mean, Showdown automatically sets it to level 100 unless you're playing Little Cup, and why wouldn't it? The higher your level is, the better. So why wouldn't you want the highest possible level? Well, in Chansey's case, there's a few upsides it gets out of being level 85 in particular. One of which I don't think is anything special, and the other, while how good it actually is debatable, is really interesting. First off, being level 85 instead of level 100 means Chansey takes more damage. That seems like a weird thing to call an upside, but taking more damage means you deal more damage in return with counter. Now, more damage is nice, but I don't think this is much of an upside personally. You can achieve the same thing by just taking a level 100 Chansey and lowering its defense DV. For example, a level 85 Chansey with max stats has a defense stat of 92, and you can do the same thing with a level 100 Chansey by lowering its defense DV from 15 to 7. And by doing that, you're keeping all of the level 100 Chansey's better stats in the other categories. So, this isn't much of an upside. On top of that, this stronger counter isn't really hitting a lot of thresholds from what I can tell. Even when taking less damage at level 100, Chansey's counter does an absurd amount of damage and will KO most things from full health anyway. For example, even a weak normal type attack, such as a double edge of Executor or Articuno, is still KOing the opponent from full after recoil damage. So yeah, I don't think increased damage off counter is anything that interesting, but there's another potential upside to being level 85 that I think is really cool. See, one of Chansey's main ways of dealing damage is Seismic Toss. Seismic Toss does damage equal to your level. If you're level 100, it'll do 100 HP of damage to the opponent. So if you're level 85, it'll do 85 HP. That seems bad, right? You're just doing less damage. But where this comes into play is if you land 3 Seismic Tosses. Okay, so you've hit the opponent with 3 Seismic Tosses, so what? What matters here is that the opponent has now lost, if you've hit it from full, 255 HP, and this is where some Gen 1 fuckery comes in. See, in Generation 1, if your current HP is either 255 or 511 less than your maximum HP, then all healing moves will fail. This can be particularly nasty because you can lower an opponent's HP into a range where they can't heal and might now be susceptible to being KO'd by some other hit that normally wouldn't kill them from full. It's also particularly nasty for Pokemon that rely on rest for recovery, such as Snorlax or Jolteon, because now, if they're paralyzed, they've no way of getting rid of that paralysis, since rest will fail. Now, as cool as I think level 85 Chansey is, it's obviously pretty flawed in practice. For these two, admittedly pretty niche upsides, you effectively just have to have a worse Chansey, and Chansey's not really a Pokemon you can afford to have, a worse version of. It's a top 3 Pokemon in Generation 1 overused and should realistically be on every team. Now, that being said, compared to most level 100 Pokemon, a level 85 Chansey is still very bulky, but you really do notice the missing bulk. For example, Snorlax's Body Slam goes from a guaranteed 3-hit KO to a guaranteed 2-hit KO, and its Hyper Beam goes from doing a maximum of just below 80% to having over a 50% chance to knock you out from full health without a crit. That is massive. Also, if the opponent knows what you're trying to do with the Seismic Toss shenanigans, then it's pretty easy to play around because any kind of chip damage just completely ruins it. And it's not exactly the hardest thing to know when your opponent is trying to do this, because, your level isn't, a secret or anything. It's right there. The opponent can just, look at it. So yeah, obviously in practice, level 85 Chansey is not the most consistent thing in the world, but the fact that it's a thing in the world at all is still really cool to me. I have another Gen 1 strat I want to talk about, and this one's just hilarious to me, because it takes a move and a Pokemon that, on paper, have, negative synergy. They could not work any worse together. And then it just makes it work. What if I told you that Counter, the move that deals double the damage taken from normal and fighting type attacks, had a niche use on Gengar, a Pokemon that takes 0 damage from normal and fighting type attacks? Now, if you're using Counter for its intended purpose, aka taking damage and then dealing damage in return based off the damage you just took, then yeah, Counter on Gengar doesn't do shit. However, thanks to some classic Gen 1 fuckery, this move can genuinely be pretty surprising. See, Counter in Generation 1 doesn't calculate its damage based on a move that you took in that turn, but on the last move used. So, picture this scenario, right? Your Pokemon gets knocked out by a powerful normal move. It faints, and then you bring in Gengar. If you use Counter with Gengar, and the opponent doesn't attack you, then Gengar attacks with Counter, using the damage in calculation of that move that knocked out the previous Pokemon. So yeah, classic Gen 1, but it can potentially be pretty deadly. Now, there's flaws with this strategy, obviously. If the opponent just goes to attack you again, then this doesn't work. But that being said, I feel like that's not too hard to play around. There's a lot of Pokemon that would potentially want to switch out against Gengar. Maybe they're scared of Hypnosis, maybe they don't really have moves to hit it. For example, something like Reflectlax. Reflectlax typically just runs Body Slam and Ice Beam for attacking moves, and Ice Beam doesn't do much to Gengar at all, so it might want to just switch out. This is, again, not the most consistent thing in the world, but I think it's pretty practical, honestly. Gengar can afford to run Counter for sure. Really, you just want, an attacking move, Hypnosis, Explosion, and then the 4th move isn't super impactful, so I think this could definitely be worth going for in a real match. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have anything to talk about for Generation 2, which is a shame, and I'm not saying that Gen 2 is, void of creativity or anything. Gen 2 is fucking cool. It's just that it's the generation out of the early gens that I've played the least and I'm the least familiar with, so I've never had any situation where I've been hit by something and gone, oh wow, that sure was different from the norm, and also I got my ass beat. So, I'm afraid we're gonna have to skip it. And before anyone says anything, no, running a Generation 2 overused team without Snorlax is not creative. That's just losing. Seriously, a Gen 2 team without Snorlax is a car without an engine. Don't try it unless you're just goofing off or you really, really want to flex on someone. Now, as cool as they are to me, level 85 Chansey, and to a lesser degree Counter Gengar, are a little bit silly. So now we're going to talk about a pretty creative strat that is genuinely threatening, and something you really do need to keep in mind. Offensive Skarmory in Generation 3. Now when it comes to making creative sets, I think Generation 3 is where the floodgates just completely burst open. You have so many options available to you. There's a wider pool of Pokemon, there's more viable items, and most importantly, you've the introduction of effort values, which kind of allow you to customize your Pokemon stats. BKC has a phenomenal video talking about some underrated sets in Generation 3 Overused, and that video is an hour and a half long. And even then, that's just some of the things you can do. However, the introduction of effort values is really what makes offensive Skarmory shine. Now, you're not taking Skarmory and turning it into the next Salamence or anything like that, no. In fact, it's not even running any stab moves. You are running a single attacking move on offensive Skarmory, and that's Hidden Power Ground. And that is specifically for a certain Pokemon, Magneton. Now, as amazing as Skarmory is in Generation 3, Magneton is like the definition of a hard counter for it. It can switch in extremely easily, it threatens a one-hit KO with Stab Thunderbolt, and most importantly, it has the ability Magnet Pull, which traps Steel types, preventing them from switching out. If you get your Magneton in on a Skarmory, that's kind of GG's. Except for Hidden Power Ground offensive Skarmory. With maximum attack investment and an adamant nature, Skarmory's Hidden Power Ground will knock out a Magneton from full health if it doesn't have any significant bulk investment, and the vast majority of Magnetons don't. They typically run max special attack, max speed, and a modest nature. As cool as this is, it's a big investment. Skarmory is an extremely valuable defensive Pokemon, so having to invest so many EVs in attack and speed, you know, it's rough, and you really do have to do it. Even if you run max attack investment and a jolly nature, you only have just over an 80% chance to knock out a Magneton from full health if it has no bulk investment, and like, the odds are still in your favor, but you'd really rather the consistency. Also, just for the record, the reason you don't need to run a jolly nature, despite the fact that Magneton and Skarmory have the same speed stat, base 70, is that Magneton almost always runs Hidden Power Fire, which means it has to lower its speed EV by 1. So, if you take a Skarmory and a Magneton that both have max speed investment and both don't have a speed boosting nature, Skarmory will always go first. The coolest thing about this set to me is that it's actually really good. It's not Skarmory's like definitive best set or anything, but it's something you really do have to take into account, and that's so cool to me. You're taking a defensive Pokemon and setting it up in a way where it's becoming significantly worse at the thing that it's designed to do just to handle one of its worst matchups, and still, it's fucking great, and I think that's sick. But that's enough practical stuff, let's get back to some silly shit. This next set is one that I hinted I'd talk about in my Nerf Strats and Competitive Pokemon video, and it's a bit of a wacky one, because it actually takes a nerfed strategy and uses that nerf to its advantage. This is Sleep Talk and Whirlwind Aerodactyl. And when I say Sleep Talk and Whirlwind, I mean just those two moves. Whirlwind is a very simple move. It has negative priority, which means it'll usually always go last, and it forces the opponent to switch out. That's pretty good. However, if Sleep Talk selects a move like Whirlwind or Roar, then the negative priority is ignored. This is really important on a fast Pokemon such as Aerodactyl, which is faster than the vast majority of the metagame. It ties with Jolteon, and the only faster Pokemon are lower tier mons such as Electrode and Ninjask. So here's how you use this set. What you want to do is intentionally get your Aerodactyl put to sleep. You predict a sleep-inducing move and you switch in on it. Simple as that. Then you simply select Sleep Talk, it'll choose Whirlwind because it's the only other move you have, and you repeatedly force the opponent to switch out over and over again, ignoring Whirlwind's negative priority. This is really dangerous because it's pretty much guaranteed chip damage. If you've Spikes up, every Pokemon that gets switched in will take Spikes damage. Sandstorm is probably up, so that's a factor too, and if you've managed to poison some Pokemon beforehand, that's also dead handy. Passive damage is huge in Generation 3, so being able to force it for a couple turns with little to no counterplay is really nasty. The reason Sleep Talk's nerf is beneficial here is because if you're asleep, then use Sleep Talk and switch out, when you come back in, the game only considers you asleep for as many turns as you were asleep before you use Sleep Talk, which basically means you're asleep for longer. And on a Pokemon that wants to be asleep, that's pretty fucking good. Sleep in Generation 3 lasts 2 to 5 turns, so you basically get 2 turns of guaranteed shenanigans before you're taking a risk in staying in. However, if you switch back out and come back in again, you're guaranteed another 2 turns. Now, this strat is cool, but again, it's a bit fishy. You can't really use rest to put yourself to sleep, because then there's a chance of Sleep Talk actually picking rest, which just kind of wastes your turn. You could run a set of rest, Sleep Talk, roar, and whirlwind, so you've only a 1 in 3 chance of getting rest, but still pretty inconsistent. There's also the issue that the opponent could just not have a sleep-inducing move, in which case you're pretty much playing 5-6. This set is very gimmicky, but when it works, it's kind of fucking whack. There's no getting around it. Moving on to Gen 4, I've something a little bit different. This is less about taking a Pokemon and using a particularly creative set on that Pokemon, and it's more about the fact that you're using the Pokemon at all. That's where the creativity comes from. We're going to talk about Ariados in Generation 4 Ubers. Now, if you're not familiar with Ariados, here's a quick rundown of what it does. Nothing, it's fucking terrible. Like, honestly, Ariados is one of the worst fully evolved Pokemon out there. It's pretty much just a worse version of Beedrill, and if you know Beedrill, you know that's a very, very low bar. Like, being outclassed by Beedrill is like if someone came up to you and said you were a less funny version of James Corden.
Let's roll, my Felicia!
However, despite the fact that it has nothing to do in overused, underused, or never used, Ariados technically can do a thing in Ubers. It's not much, right? It's not some kind of anti-meta threat that everyone's sleeping on. But it's probably better in Ubers than it is in any other tier, which is pretty cool to think about. Ariados has some kind of a spot in the lead metagame of Gen 4 Ubers. Now, the lead metagame of Gen 4 Ubers is really intricate and interesting, but here's a bit of an oversimplification just to kind of get the idea across. Is your lead Deoxys Speed? If it is, then that's good. It's an amazing lead, probably the best in the tier. Okay. If your lead isn't Deoxys Speed, can it beat Deoxys Speed, stop it from getting too many hazards up, or do you have a plan in the back to deal with the hazards later? No? Then your team fucking sucks. Ariados has 3 key traits that let it nearly exist in the Uber tier. For a start, it has Bug Stab and Shadow Sneak, which on paper lets it stop Deoxys Speed from getting more than 1 layer of hazards up. You chunk it with Bug Bite, and then you have a priority Shadow Sneak that will definitely finish it off, before it can get a 2nd layer of hazards up. That's good. Next, it has its own hazards. Toxic Spikes. Toxic Spikes are incredibly impactful in Ubers where there are very few viable poison types to actually absorb them. So, if it somehow does get a free turn, it's got something pretty good to do with it. And lastly, Ariados has the Insomnia ability, which means it's immune to sleep, so something like Darkrai can't put it to sleep with Dark Void. And that's important because Darkrai is another very common lead. Now, all of this sounds good, and technically speaking they're good traits. But Ariados is very, very far from good. There's no way around it. For a start, it's using Bug Bite. Ariados doesn't learn X-Scissor in Generation 4, which really sucks. It means that you can't kill Darkrai with Bug Bite into priority. Realistically, Ariados is not a good Pokemon, or even a good lead in Generation 4 Ubers. I mean, there's a reason it's not even listed on the viability rankings. Yeah, on paper, you beat Focus Sash and Cobra Berry variants of Deoxys Speed, but those aren't the only variants, right? Like, if you click Bug Bite on Deoxys Speed, and suddenly it tricks a Choice Scarf onto you, you've suddenly just got death fodder that could maybe set up Toxic Spikes later in the game if the opponent falls asleep at their desk. Maybe. Potentially. Also, I think some people are under the impression that Ariados also beats Darkrai. No, it really doesn't. It really does not. In order to beat Darkrai, you really just kinda have to hope that the Darkrai user forgets you have Insomnia, so you get a free turn because they click Dark Void. In that case, you can do Bug Bite into Bug Bite, and yeah, good for you. But in any other scenario, you're not surviving 2 Dark Voids. No way. So yeah, Ariados... It can... It's trying its best, right? It's trying its best, okay? There's also the fact that, like, yeah, okay, you can make an argument for Ariados in the lead matchup. But, there's more to Gen 4 Ubers than the lead matchup, right? There's pretty much no way in hell Ariados has anything on the other 5 Pokemon on the opponent's team. It's just not happening. It's nearly doing something, and maybe at some point in time it actually did some stuff, you know? Maybe it caught some players off guard, but realistically, it's not a great pick. But that being said, you know, it's got a bit of a reputation, right? Someone at some point in time looked at Gen 4 Ubers, looked at Ariados, and was like, yeah, I can make this work. And in a way, they actually did. Like, yeah, Ariados has a ton of problems in Gen 4 Ubers, but when you consider how fucking bad of a Pokemon it is, jeez, it's doing okay, right? Now, there's one Gen 5 strat I want to talk about, and it's not because it's super creative or anything like that, but because I distinctly remember getting caught by it myself and going, what the fuck? What was that? And that's Choice Band Ferrothorn. Now, Ferrothorn is one of the most notorious defensive Pokemon out there. It's amazing in Gen 5, and for the most part, it's been amazing in every tier it's been in since then. Now, that being said, it's an amazing defensive Pokemon. You know, it's got sky-high defense, access to Leech Seed and Protect, it can set up hazards really well, but a lot of people overlook that attack stat. That's not awful, but again, Ferrothorn just kinda has better things to be doing than messing around with offensive sets. And that's what most people think, and because of that, there's a lot of potential to really catch someone off guard who's not expecting an offensive Ferrothorn. Now, this is in a very different vein to the offensive Skarmory set that I talked about earlier. Offensive Skarmory isn't trying to be an offensive Pokemon. It's investing in offense so it can take out one of its hardest counters. Ferrothorn, on the other hand, if it's running an offensive set, no, yeah, it's actually just trying to be an offensive Pokemon. Now, obviously, there's a reason people don't do stuff like this more often. There's a bit of an opportunity cost here. By running this wacky set on your Ferrothorn, you're giving up a potentially really good Ferrothorn. You know, one that's actually doing what it's designed to do. When you use something like this, you know that it's not the best at what you're trying to make it do. But it's the surprise factor, right? And I distinctly remember this. I remember being in a bit of a bad spot, facing my opponent's Ferrothorn, and bringing in my Cure in Black. And I was like, okay, right, worst case scenario here is that it's running Gyro Ball, and, you know, I probably won't get hit on the switch, but maybe I'll get hit while I'm in, and that'll do, you know, just over half, around 60%, you know? And then I remember fucking dying from full health on the switch as I get smacked with a Choice Band Gyro Ball. Like, I didn't see it coming, but it was kind of cool, and I have to give props for that, you know? And ever since then, I've had, like, a fondness for doing stuff like this. Like, taking a Pokemon that's designed to do one thing, and then just making it do something else, you know? And just when I'm playing for fun, like, with friends and stuff, sometimes I'll run dumb strats like that, you know? I've run Papaya Berry Special Attacking Sizzle. There's something fun about that. And obviously, these strats are not the most consistent thing in the world. They're very silly, and you have that opportunity cost of, you know, not being able to run a good set on that Pokemon. But there's a bit of a charm to it, and I can't deny that. Now, there's one more strat I want to talk about, and it's a Gen 6 strat. And there's a specific reason I want to talk about this strat in particular. We're talking about Fly Knight, which is a Dragonite that runs Fly as its only attacking move. Now, Fly is pretty notorious because it's one of those moves that is really good if you're just, playing the single player, blasting through the game, but is complete garbage against actual people. This is because Pokemon, for some reason, has just had dumb as fuck AI for like 25 years now, If it's pretty obvious that you're going to hit the opponent with something that's going to kill him on the next turn, they just kind of sit there and take it. But against actual people, they know better. They'll just switch out. What makes Fly Knight work is that Dragonite is really, really bulky and can set up a lot of stuff pretty easily, and this is thanks to multi-scale. See, multi-scale allows Dragonite to take 50% less damage as long as it's at max health. This means it can set up a Dragon Dance pretty safely. And then, once it's got that Dragon Dance, it can kinda go to town. See, it's got Roost to restore its health back up to full, and then, activate multi-scale again. It's got Substitute to block status, and what makes Fly nice is that, unlike Dragon Claw, nothing is immune to Fly. And because of how bulky it is, it's not super unrealistic for Dragonite to get multiple boosts, so it can potentially just chip you away over and over again. Also, keep in mind that that turn where it's just up in the air, and you can't hit it, and it can hit you, it's getting leftovers recovery, And that's going to add up over time. That extra turn also helps it preserve PP for Substitute and Roost, and can let it pretty effectively stall you, which is pretty scary. Now, what I like about Fly Knight is that not only is it just a genuinely good set, but it's arguably Dragonite's best set in Generation 6. And I kind of love that. See, someone looked at Gen 6 Dragonite, and then they looked at Fly, this move that is generally considered terrible. And not only did they think about it, put something together, and make a good set, they made arguably the best set. And it really goes to show just how important, thinking outside the box is when it comes to Pokemon, A lot of people really do feel like the creativity isn't there when it comes to team building. A lot of people just assume anything that they could come up with isn't worthwhile, They'll just go off to Smogon analysis and, see what the set of the month is. Go get a sample team, slap that together, maybe change one or two moves depending on what you've heard. But you gotta remember, the reason that these sets come up in the first place is from people having ideas and putting them into practice to see if they work. And a lot of the time they do. That's why metas change. That's why Pokemon just don't sit in the same tier forever. And that's all because of people experimenting, being creative, and having faith in what they come up with. And you should do that too. I remember on my video on niche items, a lot of people sent me some of their own sets that they put together just for fun, and a lot of them were really cool. The viability is debatable, but I wouldn't know. I didn't try them. So, how about you do that? If you have an idea, try it out and see what you can do. You might be pleasantly surprised. Peace.